Hi everyone, Michelle Ferreri here, Member of Parliament for Peterborough-Kawartha, and thank you so much for joining us on this episode of People Before Politics. Now, for those of you who have been following along, thank you. I love getting the feedback, getting more and more kind of feedback from people who have started to watch this series. And I think we probably have about 12 or 13 now that we've recorded, and would love you to listen to all of them. And the premise behind this series was really to bring the human aspect to the elected official. So what we've seen in our society is we've seen this kind of disconnect, a lot of it because of social media, where people just kind of hurl words and sort of vile things at people, forgetting that they are a human, right? A mother, a father, a sister, a brother before they were an elected official. And they have lived experience that shaped what they believe. And that's what they're doing here as an elected official, is to stand up for what they believe and to serve a community that they serve. So today I'm really excited to welcome this guest, and it's a great opportunity for me to get to know Earl Dreeshen a lot better. Did I say that last name right? Dreeshen. Yeah. So Earl always jumped out at me because you look so much like my Uncle Scott. I always want to call him Scott, so he's like this doppelganger to me, to my Uncle Scott. So I just automatically like Earl because he reminds me of my Uncle Scott, who's also got a very similar disposition. He's soft, approachable, easygoing. But I'm going to give you a little bit of information here on Earl. So he's a member of Parliament for Red Deer, Alberta, well respected in business and circles and in the city and the area towns and villages. Earl and his wife Judy are fourth generation farmers, so grain farmers, you were saying, but you did have cattle.
Yes. You
did have livestock, who own and operate a family farm near Pine Lake, Alberta. They have 2 grown children, Megan and Devin, and 3 grandchildren. It gets more and more interesting, to be honest. Earl holds a Bachelor of Education degree from the University of Alberta and taught mathematics at the Innisfail High School for 34 years and retired in June 2008. He's devoted his time and expertise to working with area youth, coaching football, fastball, track and field, volleyball, and minor hockey. He's a strong leader and volunteer. What I love about this is that you were elected in 2008, 2011, 2015, and re-elected in October 2019. You have served on many standing committees, but you have literally been in a majority government, a minority government, a minority opposition, and a majority opposition.
That's correct, yes.
Earl has done it all, my friends. He's seen and done it all. So we'll go into that part. There's so much I want to talk to you about, Earl, in this interview. But the reason I wanted to have you on the show is you shared a very powerful story about what you're going through personally. And I thought it would really connect with a lot of people, because I think being a grandparent, I watch my parents, and I'm like, man, you didn't treat me like that. You asked your kids, you asked your mom or dad for an ice cream, and they were like, no, your kids, their grandkids asked for an ice cream, and they say, well, we're going to buy the store, honey. That's what we're going to do. The role of a grandparent seems to be, and I can only speak because I've seen it from afar, the love of your life. Yeah. And you're a very proud grandpa, and you're dealing with a pretty serious situation that's happening with your grandson.
Yes.
Do you want to share that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michelle, for this opportunity, and I know that you do great work on your podcast. So I'm just so pleased to be here. And we have a grandson that has what is called giant axonal neuropathy, and it's one of those. It's a condition that affects the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And basically, when he was about 3 or 4 years old, they noticed that he didn't have any reflexes in his knees, so when you whack him with the hammer and all that other kind of things that are done. And so that seemed to be a little bit odd. But so we were in Calgary at the Children's Hospital, and the neurogeneticist that was there, Dr. Moss, she she saw his tight curly hair that he had, and of course, like my hair, it's straight. So that seemed to be different, and that was the marker that made her think that he might have this condition. Now, as far as rareness is concerned, there are 50 families in the world that have this. There are 73 cases, and Julian happens to be one of 2 that is in Alberta, and that's I think really started us on a bit of a journey. And in order to deal with genetic disorders, there were some opportunities to look at some pilot projects. So we had actually become part of that. They had done some baseline testing in Calgary, but then he was sent to, or was able to go to Bethesda, Maryland, to the National Institute of Health, and so they did more baseline testing there as well. And it was a very unique program where, as long as you could get onto U.S. soil, well, then they would take you, to Bethesda and go through all the processes, and your support team could go with you. So he came back, and again, it's a pilot project, so you don't know just what is going to happen. But of course, then COVID hit, and so then that window closed, and so he didn't have that opportunity to kind of continue with it. So that's but as a youngster, I'll tell you, he is the most compassionate individual that you would ever know. Right now he has lost the use of his legs, so therefore he drives he drives around in his electric wheelchairs, and he's a fantastic driver. But I think a unique part about him is, you can go into a grocery store, and he'll read somebody's name tag and say hi. And when he leaves, he remembers their name. He can say goodbye to them and thank them for helping out or whatever, even just walking down the aisle. So that would be a great skill as a politician to have.
Got that from his grandpa.
Yes. No, he doesn't. I think he has that from his grandmother. But no, that's just the kind of guy that he is. So this Curly Hair Day was an initiative that people that have this giant axonal neuropathy, or GAN, had initiated. And so that was the point that I was attempting to make in my statement in the House.
So he's how old now?
He's 9.5.
9.5. And so the disease obviously being so rare, what do you have for treatment other than these kind of trial things? Or
well, there
is it progressive?
There isn't really a treatment, because it's a genetic order. There's a breakdown in the proteins, and the only potential solution would be some type of a gene therapy where you would attempt to send something through the system so that it could get this this protein working again and doing its job. So it's simply going to get to the stage where that as I say, he's already lost the use of his legs, but he still manages to go around and do a lot of cool things. So
his mind.
His mind is very sharp, and eventually, there's it makes it a little bit more difficult for him to talk, and so that's something that, again, as a grandparent, because you can hear and understand what they're saying, but I think it's a concern, but as I say, people that meet him love him, and I think that's the key thing. So.
Well, do they call you Grandpa?
Yeah, Grandpa's the way it is.
Grandpa's the way it is.
No fancy names or anything like that.
No Papa,
so.
just Grandpa.
That's right, yeah.
It's amazing. Like, we have lots of grandparents in our caucus, and the love of it's so often you'll see, like, you're sitting or waiting in between votes or something,
Yes.
and Mel Arnold is one that sits behind me, and the first thing he does is whip out these pictures of his grandkids, right? And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges of this job, is being away from your family and your grandkids. So I really appreciate you sharing this and bringing it to light, because it's pretty personal and it's pretty tough. I'm sure it's been a pretty big journey for you guys. So I really appreciate you educating people about it. The other thing I want to talk to you about is being a teacher. 34 years, and your wife was a teacher as well.
Yes.
And I make a running joke about conservative teachers. They're unicorns. I call them unicorns. And, I had a young gentleman in my office yesterday, and he was speaking about not feeling free to express how he actually feels politically or ideology-wise with his teachers in university. And I've seen a lot of kids have written to me and said, I just wrote the paper that I knew my teacher wanted me to write instead of saying what I actually believed. Have you seen that change in your time, or what message would you give to teachers out there?
Well, for starters, I did have the advantage that I taught high school mathematics and calculus and physics.
Oh God!
so therefore
we wouldn't have been that close, Mr. Dreeshen.
So therefore, well, no, my job would have been to make it so that you enjoyed that.
Okay.
So that, so from that perspective, it's kind of right or wrong, and you might have a couple of theories on light, but other than that,
yes.
That's about it. But no, I know what you're speaking about, and I think I found that more when I speak to students that have gone to universities, and they are a little bit nervous about because they see their instructors being pretty forceful about their positions, and I think there's a certain nervousness about writing something that might kind of be flagged. Now, a great teacher will look at that and say, hey, how well did you explain it? Because that was the point I was trying to get at. But there's still people that, they do get a little nervous about what is, about how it might be graded, because when it comes right down to it, that's one of the important parts, so.
It's so important if I was to say anything, it's so important to encourage critical thinking, right? I think that's one of the biggest things, right, is to ask why or why are you doing this? So in all of your experience, when do you think you sort of said, hey, I'm a conservative? This is always what I find about your childhood or growing up. I mean, did you grow up in Red Deer?
I grew up in a family farm just about 35 miles or so from Red Deer. My family had come to the Northwest Territories in 1892. My wife's family had also come at that time. They didn't bring the families though until about 1902 or 1903. We were there when before Alberta was a province, and it was important to look after your community. So they were the ones that built the schools and the churches and made sure that hospitals were there. So all of those sorts of things were done by the people of the community. And so there was the fact that things needed to be done, and government wasn't there to really direct. It was a case of what can you do best to help out your community. So
say that louder for the people in the back, please, Earl.
Well, yes, government.
That's what we're missing.
Government wasn't there to help everybody. You had to do what you needed to do to help people in your community, and so that I think was the key thing. So I saw that. I knew that my great grandparents had been part of that. My grandfather, my dad, mom, they were there to help build the community. And they were also, entrepreneurs. I mean, they were farmers and business people. So that too was important. So we grew up with that. And when I started university, I had a very very interesting start to life, because I went to a one-room schoolhouse, and so uphill each way and everything else, all those stories, But my great aunt had been a grade 1 teacher in BC, and she came to stay with us for the summer before I started grade 1. So she taught me how to read and write before I went to school. So, I'm in a classroom from grade 1 to 9, so all of the students were in the same room.
Yeah.
And so I had everything on the board that I could look at, So I knew what was happening, in grade 6 social studies, and grade 9, language arts and mathematics and so on. So I had this great advantage when I started, so I managed. And when my birthday was, and so they moved me up a grade. So I actually was registered for high school when I was 16, or for university, I should say, when I was 16, and started university at 17. I kind of kid people that I think I sort of peaked in about grade 4, but nevertheless, I did have that advantage. And when I went to university, it was in straight mathematics, but then I had also bought a farm because my brother and we were renting land when we were going to high school, and so that's kind of why I decided I would go into education because it could be closer to home. And go from there. So yeah, it was a sort of a business and look after the community growing up, that I had, and so that's really where that went.
I find the wisdom that our more senior caucus have is critical, right? Because it's like you have the experience and wisdom that like you've seen the changes. Like you've seen how things have shifted. Yeah. And in particular, when we look at farming, which is like what feeds all of us, how have you seen that shift? Because we're seeing less and less families take over the family business or want to. And we've just seen a social shift. Like we were talking about this off camera before we started. Like that, like how you explained to Julian, like making human connections in like saying hi. When I came in here, the gentleman at the security at the door, he says, "What's your name?" I said, "I'm Michelle." I said, "What's yours?" "Gerard." And people don't do that anymore. And so you've seen a lot happen in that time. Like, I mean, from a one-room schoolhouse to where we are now, the technology, I think, is the fastest changes we've ever seen in history, right? So where do you see the farming industry and everything, really, in your observations?
Well, I've been on the agriculture committee, and so that's as well. Many committees over the years, but that really is something that that I understand well. It is a little bit disconcerting because you will have people that'll tell you just how farmers should be able to farm and that kind of thing, political people.
People who don't farm.
Well, that they don't, but I mean, they have these ideas, here's how much fertilizer you should use, or here's a really good idea, why don't you do some zero tillage, or why don't you use some GPS? Well, we've been doing that for 40 years, so I mean, they really think they come up with some real novel ideas, but I mean I've had GPS for over 20 years, so these are the kinds of things that we have. Agriculture is so high tech, and I think that's one thing that is important to have young people understand, because if you can do that, they'll find a place in it. We have Olds College in my riding, and it is just an amazing facility, and so I mean they teach all the high tech farming techniques and things with cattle and with horses and so on. So just some fantastic programs, and so I think that's what I see happening in the future. But sadly, I mean, if we look at what has just happened in the Netherlands, where the governments have said, "Hey, you guys are using too much energy. We are going to we're going to take your land." And there will be a reduction. I mean, that
scary.
It's asinine that they would think that way. And we do have people that believe that they know better, and that is where it's frustrating. So I think that's where agriculture is right now. I mean,
did you ever see it like that in your lived experience? Have you ever seen it like this? Because what I see is the same thing, where it's like a lack of trust to the people who are on the front lines, who know how to do this. It's like our government stopped trusting the people to make good decisions.
Well, I think our government has gone down some trails that don't allow it to look at what is really taking place, because they're looking at climate change and greenhouse gases and that type of thing. So when you're talking about carbon dioxide, I mean, that's what plants grow on. I mean, this is and if you look over the years instead of in decades and so on, you realize that we're things are about the way they should be. And we could use more CO2 in the atmosphere in order to help plants and that type of thing. But you have a government that just says, "Oh, this is the only way we're going to think. This is all we're going to do." Yeah. So therefore, everything that is important, is looked in by that lens. And I mean, we have oil and gas in Alberta. It is the best environmentally produced oil and gas in the world. I know when I first started campaigning, I was out, knocking on some doors and talking to some people, and this guy told me, he said, "Don't let anybody tell you that we don't have a fantastic environmental story to tell on oil and gas. There's only one place in the world that comes close, and that is Australia, and that's simply because they are using our technology, And yet I come here, and it's
meaning Parliament Hill.
Here meaning Parliament Hill,
Yes.
And it is demonized.
It's
It's
attacked.
constantly.
I was telling Earl I had the chance to go visit Alberta for the first time in my life last spring, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the beauty of the province, but the people and how you think. And I actually did a video on the side of the road because you hear this pipeline, and so for people who aren't in it, it's like you've created this visual in your head of this big, scary, wild-looking thing, and it's literally a pipe. Like literally just out of the ground along the side of the road, and then it's buried back up, and it's like the least invasive thing that but in my mind, the way that I had pipelines explained to me as a child, it was like I was expecting this beast and this oil spewing like Beverly Hillbillies all over the place. And I did this video on this side of the road, and I was like, what I have seen and what I've witnessed in my time in Alberta is I've never seen people more connected to the land than Albertans. And it's the same with farmers because they need that land.
Absolutely.
And it is in no best interest of them to not respect it. And so I just find it very fascinating that people have, and it's often because they've never seen it or experienced it.
Well, I've been on numerous committees, and I've been on international trade, and I've been on environment, and I have, as I said, I've been on agriculture, industry, and now on natural resources. What really does upset me is because, when I go up to Fort McMurray, look at the oil sands, yes, you have a mining operation that you're dealing with in some cases, and most of it now is like you say, it's just there's a spot, they drill a hole and away they go.
So small.
But I mean, on the mining operation part, and all you have to do is turn around 180 degrees, and you'll see what reclamation is all about. And people can't believe that within 20 years...
People may not know what reclamation is. Tell them.
Well, basically what is required by the oil sands companies is that land has to be put back into the same or better condition than it was in the first place. And so therefore it is all filled in. It is, if there were creeks, there was creeks. If there is ponds, there were ponds. And there has to be trees in there as well. And you cannot tell the difference between it and the normal vegetation that would be there. And that is what reclamation is about. And so, being on natural resources, I look at it and everyone says, oh, well, we are therefore going to put all of these, we'll find lithium, we'll find cobalt, we'll find nickel, we'll do all of these sorts of things. I said, well, that's great. Well, are you going to put it back in the same position, in the same condition as they do in the oil sands, And I know they aren't, but that's okay, because it's important to have our industries being able to produce. It's much better than bringing it in from other places in the world.
That's right.
Because we will make sure that we deal with these things in an environmentally friendly way. But if we continue to throw roadblocks up, which is what we usually find, then we will have no choice but to buy these things from other places that really don't care about the environment, and in many cases they don't care about the people that are out there producing it. So that's one of the frustrations that I have in that regard.
No, it's well said, and I think it's always important to ask the intention behind the person in charge, right? And I think if any good business person wants to see sustainability, it is in not anyone's best interests to destroy or bite the hand that feeds you, which is in Alberta's case the earth, right? So it's a very interesting dynamic of how that narrative has played out, and then to be demonized for trying to to help people heat their home and to fuel their cars and to feed them, right? And it's very interesting. So I want to ask you your advice, because I said at the beginning of this interview, and you have such wisdom, and I just wanted to refer, I didn't mean to say that you're a senior earlier. I meant
pretty well. If you do the math.
Well, I guess you are. Like, I think of my parents now, right? They're seniors, but I think sometimes that is taken as like an ageism thing, and it's like, that's not what I meant. I meant being like a senior member of caucus, right? Like, I think, and that's how it works, right? So somebody like myself comes in, and we rely so heavily, I know I rely so heavily on the wisdom of members who've served, because you come into this world that there's no other way to learn than by peer mentorship, right? And so it's so valuable. But you've served on this majority government. You've served on these, and I know we touched on this, but have you seen in any of your time a government that has been so controversial, so incompetent that we are seeing right now?
Well, the biggest thing that I see is the divisiveness. That if you divide, you can conquer. And I believe that that is the type of thing that we see. And of course, if you think of the last number of years with COVID and so on, people are able to put labels on individuals, and then people fight back because of that. Right. To go back to what you had mentioned about the different types of governments that I've been part of.
All of them.
I did start in a minority government, so at that time, there were a lot of things I had to learn. I mean, I'd been engaged politically, so I understood what to expect when I was here. But the reality was that we had lots of things that we said we were going to do, but the opposite, our opponents at the time, would not allow us to do much more than just pass a budget, which is really the only legal thing that a government has to do. Once we became a majority government, we were then able to go back and to look at those types of things that we had said, this is what the country needs, and this is what you can expect from us. And the other advantage, that we had when Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister, and you think about the way in which other political parties are structured. We had what are called caucus advisory committees, and really, if you had an interest in anything that was going to be mentioned and dealt with by ministers or whatever, they wanted your opinion. And so it was, if you wanted to talk about agriculture policy, there was a group that would be sitting down with the minister, and they'd be talking about, well, this is what some people are suggesting, and so on, but how would that affect your part of the country? You're also involved in international trade, so how do you think that would happen? How would these things be affected? So you had this feeling of belonging, that
voice was heard.
That your voice was being heard.
Do you mean to tell me that other parties don't have caucus advisory committees?
I can't speak about other parties, but I do know that some of them, when they realize what we had and what we still continue to have,
yes,
they kind of look in awe. That
actually,
I didn't
know that. So just for people at home, if we want to put something forward, like as Conservatives, we have to go through a multi-step process with all of our colleagues and bring people in and hear all voices, which is the true Conservative way, right? Like and so you have to ensure that you're not just barreling over people, that you are hearing and you are having a democratic process to ensure that it is helping, that the risk versus reward is beneficial.
Well, and I think too, when you're in government, and I think I've seen it here, I've seen it municipally, and I've seen it provincially. Sometimes the bureaucrats say, okay, well, this is kind of how we'd like to see it done, and or this is something we want to see done whether you like it or not, and so therefore it gets kind of thrown on the table for the next bit of discussion. If the political leaders don't get a chance to get input, then you have no idea what kind of rabbit holes it's going to be done, or what type of unintended consequences are going to exist because of that.
And if the political leaders aren't listening to the people who elected them and the people who didn't elect them, that's a very important point.
Yeah.
Then you have a major problem.
Yeah.
Because it's your role in this position to take all the voices and say, well, like, now you are governed, have an ideology, like I represent a conservative value, but that doesn't mean that I can't or shouldn't listen to people in my riding who don't share that same value, right? Yeah. So when that voice isn't at the table, well, that's when dangerous stuff starts to happen.
The advantage that we do have is that we are a true national party, because we have members of parliament all across the land, and from the Maritimes and so on, where some of the other political parties, I mean, they really there's times where you feel like they think, well, we don't need to hear from them.
Canada revolves around Toronto.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to say that because I know.
I'll say it for you, Earl.
But when you've got over 70% of the population below the 49th parallel, if there's only 3 capital cities that are above the 49th parallel, and that's in the prairie provinces. I mean, we do have them in the territories as well, but that's the way it is. And for us, the 49th parallel, that was way south. That's where Montana was, so that's where the U.S. is. But so it's a different world. So there's 2 different types of worlds that we have. One is the fact that, Southern Ontario and Quebec and so on and are so close to the U.S., so there's a lot of influences that are associated with that. Secondly, a lot of the population is in the major cities. And other than my being here in Ottawa when I have to be, and having gone to university at the U of A, that's been how much time I've spent in big cities, and and they aren't particularly big cities in the major scheme of things. So I have to count on my colleagues to explain to me what the circumstances are, for major urban cities and for those that are so closely aligned to the U.S.
And they have to count on you.
Well, and I hope...
You have to trust, and you have to be open to understanding that, and hence the whole point of this podcast, this video, because it's like you bring a lived experience and knowledge that somebody from the GTA doesn't have. Yeah. And as Canada has, like, our biggest strength is our biggest weakness, right? We have to cover this geography. How do you make decisions that serve the people in downtown Toronto and in rural Alberta or Nunavut, right? It's a very big challenge that we have before us when you're making these decisions. So that's why we always say as conservatives, less government, let the people choose, let the people govern, right? Like with as less big bossy government. Okay, so some fun facts about you, Earl. What would be your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, I do actually like Star Wars, so.
May the 4th be with you, my friend.
Yes, and this is the day, and I've already sent that to my daughter, who could probably go through each and every one of the, she's a teacher as well.
Oh, great.
So I've really enjoyed that. I mean, old enough, it's more like a Star Trek type of thing, but no, that's kind of where, as far as movies are concerned.
I see, through your bio, which we talked about at the beginning, a lot of involvement in sports and coaching. Yes. So is that a great hobby of yours?
Well, it is. The funniest story that I have, I suppose, is when I was about 8 years old, my aunt told me, we've got this relative that they think might make it into the NHL sometime. And anyway, she was an Orr. So therefore, we always call him Cousin Bob, but so
he shoots, he scores, he's Bobby Orr.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah.
Sorry about your Boston, by the way.
Well, I actually started with Detroit because we never had a television, so I was listening to Foster Hewitt and talking about Delvecchio Howe and Lindsay and so on. So so that's really how I started to think about what hockey was all about. And we lived out in the country, so we never really had those opportunities to kind of play. And then, of course, when the television came, then we could watch them. But the Bobby Orr thing made us Boston fans until he was gone. And then when I went to university, I was at the U of A, and the Oilers were in the WHA at that time. And one of my phys ed partners was playing with the Oilers there, so it was pretty easy to become a an Oilers fan after that. So.
I sure hope it's the Leafs and the Oilers in the final Stanley Cup.
Well, they're each down a game now, so they're going to have to.
It'd be pretty amazing, though, wouldn't it?
It would be.
That would be pretty phenomenal. Okay, couple last fun questions. What do you love the most about this job?
The people that I get to meet. That, I think, is the important part. When you walk down the street now, if somebody notices who you are, they'll want to talk to you. And you get to listen to their stories. And I think, and of course that helps your own confidence. And when you're seeing somebody, you ask to listen to theirs. I mean, that's the key thing. That's what makes it so important. There's lots of things that we do, that are on the political side of things, but they all affect individuals. Yeah. And that's the key. So I get some amazing stories, and and there many are heartbreaking stories, but nevertheless they need someone to speak to, and and so that's the part that I enjoy. The part I enjoy least is flying back and forth, but that's
terrible.
Yeah,
it is. I don't think people at home understand, and the time change,
well,
and
that's true.
and it's just, and I say, listen, with all due respect, I know it's hard on men, but like with women and their toiletries and their clothes I'm so fortunate. I do think that I just have to drive 3 hours. Yeah. That's it. It's 3 hours, 18 minutes, and 26 seconds. Not that I'm counting. Yeah. But it's, to get on those planes, you guys have so much to do. Yeah. What would be the one thing you want to make sure you've achieved by the time you're out?
At this particular point in time, like I did have some background with, I was on a hospital board for a number of years and that type of thing. I really hope that we can find some solutions for research in healthcare that is at the international level. It does tie a bit into what I was dealing with, with Julian, as I had mentioned earlier. But it's always been that way. I mean, even before he was born, I mean, this was one of the things that I felt was so important. And having been on a hospital board, I made a point whenever we would go to conventions is to talk to leading researchers to say how can we stop this. I mean, cancer was something that had really affected our family, and so that became part of it. But then you start to hear, when you're in that group, you start to hear about all of these other childhood diseases and other types of afflictions. I spent 4 months in the Children's Hospital in Calgary when I was a kid. So I got to learn.
What?
Well, I was ran into by a truck on a motorbike. Yeah, so I spent 4.5 months in Calgary.
Wow.
And so it was a unique experience. I know it's a little tricky, but I mean, I was at the Holy Cross Hospital, and I was the oldest in the children's ward. So the student nurses that were there, the Beatles were playing on the Ed Sullivan Show, so they reeled me in my bed so that I could watch the Beatles with all the nurses. So, and then after that, I went to the Children's Hospital. So I spent, I got my schooling there and that type of thing. I had the surgeon that I had was the doctor for the Calgary Stampeders, and so I had. The doctor from, actually I did just a couple of weeks ago, I did a statement on Dr. Graham, who was my doctor, that had worked at the Holy Cross and knew Dr. Murphy. And so they kind of, worked together to kind of patch me back up again. So that was kind of neat.
You never know what somebody's story is. Everybody has something. Of course, Earl just drops this bomb at the very end of the interview. Unbelievable, Earl, and I think thank you for sharing your story. It's so nice to get to know people on a deeper level and really see who you are and what you bring to the table. And there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of wisdom in that brain that our caucus needs and all of Parliament needs. So I really appreciate that. If people want to follow you or maybe support the cause for your grandson Julian, is there a way that they could follow you on social media or message you, or is there something like that?
Basically, getting a hold of me, through my office is the best way. Some people, such as yourself, are much better on social media. But certainly, I would appreciate it. I'd be honored to be able to speak to people that have causes that they think that I could help champion. So.
Earl, it's a pleasure really nice to get to know you, and I hope I get to come to Alberta again soon. And
absolutely.
can't wait to see some more photos of Julian, and wishing him all the best. Julian, thank you for letting your grandpa be so proud of you and talk about you. I hope you're doing well, buddy. Thank you to everyone for watching this episode of People Before Politics. You can stream it online on any of the podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook. Here we are. Please share it. Please watch it, and I really love the dialogue when you watch and have feedback. So thank you to everybody for watching, and thank you to our guests, Earl, for this episode of People Before Politics.